if you get a few dollars to do something, look at what you can do. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's a real example of how if we can invest in our public realm and our public, that we get better outcomes.
Yeah, I'm excited about the future of Lowell. Hello, this is Ryan Oates. Welcome to this video podcast. That's what we're going to call it, video podcast. I've been thinking a lot recently about how to make life better for people in Lowell. And in talking with my friends and talking with family, I've come to the belief that one of the most basic human needs we have is for financial security. My wife and I are in a place where we're hoping to buy a house eventually. When we have kids, we're going to want to be able to afford childcare. And, I have family members who, like, one of their biggest preoccupations right now is thinking about when they retire, will they be financially secure? And of course, one of the ways to make sure that people have financial security in Lowell is to make sure there are good jobs here. So if we want to make people's lives better, one of the core questions is, how do we bring good jobs to Lowell? Now, I am not an expert in economic development or in regional planning. I'm a middle school teacher. But luckily, we do have experts who have been grappling with this question of how do we bring good jobs to Lowell? How do we improve Lowell's economic development? One of those local experts is Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes is the Director of Housing and Economic Development of NMCOG, the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. And in November 2025, he helped to create a comprehensive economic development strategy for Greater Lowell. It's called Greater Lowell Stronger Together. Throughout that process, he and the planning team worked with all kinds of stakeholders from all across Greater Lowell to put together a plan for how to improve the region's economy. One of the things I really appreciate about Chris is that throughout our conversation about this report, which, it's pretty wonky, it's got a lot of details in it. In our conversation, he consistently brought us back to how can we make life better for people in Lowell. So here's my conversation with Chris Hayes. Chris, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I brought you on to talk about the Greater Lowell Stronger Together plan, or report, I guess you would call it. And we'll get into the specifics of that in a second. But I want to start, for those who are less familiar, I'm wondering, could you describe what NMCOG is?
Yeah, what's an NMCOG? So it's Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, and it's a regional planning agency. Every municipality in Massachusetts belongs to one of 13 of these regional planning agencies. We're the one for the city of Lowell, all the municipalities that touch Lowell, and then some of the towns going west toward Westford and Pepperell. We kind of play two roles. Our bosses, our council, is made up of elected officials and planning board members from each of those 9 municipalities that we serve. And we play two roles for them. One is that we are a technical assistant. I like to say we are a free or very cheap consultant that does planning consulting on anything from housing to economic development, transportation, land use sustainability, or any other number of planning topics. And the other one is we're a convener. So we try to get those 9 municipalities together with the state or with other entities to work on shared challenges.
Great. And so you listed a bunch of categories of different things that you work on, whether it's housing or different types of infrastructure, et cetera. But this report in particular is about economic development. I'm wondering, similarly, just to kind of set the table, could you describe what is economic development and why does it matter?
That is, I could just continue talking the entire time for that question. This is a comprehensive economic development strategy. So that's a required document by the United States Department of Economic Development Administration, Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration. And it's required to get various federal grants. But that's just why we name it a CEDS. Like, why do we do this work? And I would say economic development is at its core about quality of life for the people who are in an area. But that could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. It could mean bringing jobs. It could mean connecting people to jobs. It could mean increasing the efficiency of firms. So we know that firms that work together or that have special supports do more for us, whether that be anything from a small mom and pop to Silicon Valley. Companies have done great things, and that's because they've been supported by various entities in the meantime. It can also mean equity. It can also mean making sure that everybody has a fair shot and access to jobs and opportunities. And that's really a critical thing in a region and what inspires my work.
I'm glad you said that, and how there are multiple definitions of economic development, multiple lenses to use when looking at it. To focus on kind of the jobs and the firms, particularly right now, one of the areas I wanted to explore was you make, and I'm sure this is an economic term that I'm just learning, but a distinction between local industries and traded industries. I think that is a kind of a baseline thing for people to know in order to understand the report. Could you describe the difference between those two, local and traded?
Absolutely. And they're both important, but we really think about them in different ways. And by we, I mean economic development planners, I guess. Local industries are exactly what they sound. They are serving local residents. So when you look at healthcare, often a lot of education, restaurants, retail, maybe some law services, things like that. Those are going to be there no matter what because they follow the residents. They're serving the residents, and they're important, and they're great sources of jobs, but they also don't necessarily bring resources into a community. And then traded industries are like export industries. So those are, I mean, they could also be lawyers, or they could be tech firms, they could be banks, they could be anything where the service being provided is not just to the residents of the region, but it's to everybody else. And what that means is that they're providing services out, and that means money coming in, and that money can enhance quality of life. We talk about traded industries a lot because the other piece of that is a big reason why a place, well, not a place exists, but a city exists, or a group of cities like the NMCOG region, the Greater Lowell region. It's because they are offering something unique that other folks want, and their geography or their history is providing that unique thing. So, everybody has healthcare, everybody has hospitals, but not everybody has tech industry or biotech or things like that. And so we really think about what makes the region unique, and that tends to be traded industries.
Yeah, so just to give a historical example for Lowell, and I'll ask if I've got it right.
Yeah.
So the beginning of Lowell itself, there's this new traded industry coming in, the mills, which take cotton and produce products out of them that are then sold elsewhere. And then all the other residents kind of come for that, and then local industries spring up around that. Is that more or less?
Yeah.
Am I getting that right? Okay.
That's absolutely right. So, all of the churches and the banks and all of those things were set up because residents came around, in Lowell's case, a source of water power, to create cotton fabrics and other types of textiles.
Great. Okay. So we got that kind of distinction. So given that a lot of times you're thinking about traded industries as a way that bring jobs and money into a community that then attracts local industries, I'm sure there's some diversity in the responses here, but I'm curious, among the Greater Lowell NMCOG region, with the communities that you collaborated with putting this together, what kinds of traded industries are they hoping to attract? Are they hoping to attract? Like, what is the state of that?
And that is another question that could last an entire interview period. But The CEDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, Greater Lowell Stronger Together, definitely tries to set forth a vision of what industries we have consensus on what we want to attract, and that's generally our strength areas already, and we want to become stronger in our strength areas. Some places have tourism as a traded industry, and some have finance. We have something that honestly most regions would give an arm and a leg to have, which is a very high-tech advanced manufacturing as traded industry, engineering, biotechnology, and a little bit of data, information services, computers, basically. So that is what the strength that we recognize we want to build on in terms of those traded industries. Biotech has had a boom and is kind of receding in some places. We noticed that in our region, it's not receding, but it's not really booming anymore. But that high-tech manufacturing is continuing to grow. And often in our region, it's prototyping. It's kind of very small scale, kind of startup type of things. Because when you're building, when you're inventing a new battery, you got to create a few test batteries and develop the new battery and then sell a small number of batteries to a buyer and then you grow. And often when you grow, you leave the region because you need bigger space. You need a big factory to build bunches of batteries. So you move to the south, you move overseas, whatever. So what we're really good at is that initial stage of things. And I mentioned batteries because the state is very interested in what they call climate tech.
And when we came into office last year, we said that we believed and we knew that Massachusetts should be the climate innovation lab for the entire world. Massachusetts, right here, we have the power to do just that. And we have the power to do that by investing in this ecosystem and our people. That's what this Mass Leads Act is going to do.
That is becoming a leader in industries that are going to either promote alternative energy sources, create efficiency, deal with climate mitigation, all types of things for better or for worse that we have to begin to think about and might be, for better or for worse, growth industries. And we're kind of positioned for that. But when you say, what does the region want? What do all the individuals want? You'll probably get a million different answers. Some folks, they don't want to see economic development. We could talk a little bit more about that, but they want status quo. They want to remain exactly how they are. A lot of communities are very interested in their small businesses about quality of life. That's not a traded industry, but that does play into the traded industry. So there are a lot of different answers about that, but what the consensus is that we want to build upon our strengths.
Maybe I should ask, because I know historically, Lowell built on one strength and kind of, you might say, over hyper-focused on one particular area, the mills, and we saw kind of what happens if that industry starts to collapse. I'm curious, how have people reckoned with that? Is that something that is at the forefront of people's minds when you're thinking about the future development?
It's an interesting question. I think more at the forefront is when Wing Laboratories closed in the 90s. And that was a growth industry, computers, but the particular firm, Wing Industries, didn't compete with the Hewlett-Packards and the Dells and the Apples. And that is a more recent, and that really hurt the city of Lowell in particular, but maybe the whole region, definitely. And we've bounced back from that since. And I think that was a lesson, not just on relying on one industry, but relying on one firm, one company. That said, you look and our region still has a strong computer presence. So it's thinking about how resilience, how if one company leaves, if something changes, how can you build resilience into your system so those other companies don't crumble as well, but the strength that those companies brought can continue to support. So, we still have IBM presence here. We have UKG, which is a tech company about time clocks of all things. So there's still a lot of computer and data companies on that legacy. So I think it's thinking about how to make sure that a single company isn't ruling everything, but that we're building it up so that if one company falls, all those other companies can stay.
Got it. So it's not necessarily just concern about consolidation in one industry or hyper focus on one industry, but also thinking about maybe you have a lot in one industry, but it's not all in one firm.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And flexibility, right? Like we're talking about advanced manufacturing. Before that meant maybe biotech, and now maybe it means climate tech, but it's still the same skills, the same workforce.
Got
So
it.
flexibility.
Okay, so given that general consensus about wanting to lean into our strengths, and really quickly, could you kind of bring those back to mind for me, the industries that we're mostly focused on?
Yeah, our main target export industries, and this doesn't mean that, again, healthcare is very important. We also identified construction as very important. It's not a strength, but it's something we need to build. But in terms of leaning into strengths, that is engineering, that is advanced manufacturing, it is biotech still, and it is data, computer type information services.
Got it. So given those goals, those industries we're hoping to attract, you lay out different types of infrastructure that would be needed to attract those industries. And again, just a distinction that I think is important to make in order to fully understand the report. Could you describe the difference between soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure?
Yeah. And I'm excited because we're really kind of beginning to get into the strategies in terms of what we're recommending municipalities do or what agencies that do these things do. And but we're like kind of flying by the analysis. But when we get to, oh no, not at all. Not at all. I was thinking, this is off topic from your question, but one thing that we reckon with is a lot of that advanced manufacturing is defense industry, right? And what happened, I mean, first of all, for better or for worse, defense industry. But second, what happens when federal policy changes around defense industry, for example. So these are the types of analysis that have gone into thinking about how to create more resilient economy. And part of that is through building infrastructure. Sorry, brought it around.
There we go.
And hard infrastructure is probably what everybody is thinking of when we say infrastructure. That is sewer pipes. That is the grid, the electrical grid, which is a real critical consideration right now as we move to electrification and companies become more power hungry and when we say power hungry, I mean, we're even talking about, watching a movie on Netflix requires more power than watching a movie on cable, just because of the way the computers work and they require more electricity to move the same pixels on demand. So just a lot of the things we do require more electricity as we're becoming more efficient. We still require more electricity, and the grid has trouble handling that. So that's infrastructure. Obviously, transportation and the roads are infrastructure that are hard infrastructure. But we don't want to focus only on those basics, if you will. Soft infrastructure is the people side of things that need to be built up and systems that need to support our economy. Those are the schools. Those are the public servants that are assisting businesses, emergency services, the social work that helps people into adult education or other opportunities like that. So we really want to make sure that we aren't focusing on either one to the detriment of the other.
Okay, so we've set the table with the hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Maybe we can zoom into a few and talk about more specifically like what needs have been identified for those. So one area of concern that has been in the news for years now is wastewater, but
the CSO, combined sewer overflow, sewer separation.
Yes, the combined sewer overflow. That's one thing having to do with wastewater, but I'm sure there's more things to explore in terms of wastewater infrastructure. Could you speak to the needs there?
Yeah, sewage is a real interesting topic, one that I'm not an expert at, so I'm going to be really high level here. But even a lot of people don't even know that the regional Lowell Regional Wastewater Utility, Duck Island, the sewer treatment plant, it doesn't just serve Lowell, it serves also Dracut, Tingsboro, Tewksbury, and Chelmsford. And so that's 5 communities relying on this one waste treatment plant. and the EPA permits only a certain amount of effluent to go out, taking away the combined sewer overflow question, which we can also talk about, but that's about when it happens when it storms. So when it happens, when normal things happen, the EPA restricts how much effluent or how much water Duck Island can spit out, because that water is clean, but it's not 100% clean. There's always going to be tiny particulates in there. And so the EPA says you can only have so much particulate matter that you're putting into the Merrimack River for good reasons. And so that's a hard limit, no matter how much additional technology you might put on there that plant can treat. And of that capacity, the utility has entered into agreements with each of these municipalities for a certain amount. Some of the communities are hitting their amount that they have agreed to, and there's just not an ability to increase it. It gets complex because, and this is where economic development planning comes in, some of the communities have hit 80% of their capacity. And when you hit 80%, that's when the state allows you to start putting on moratoriums and saying nobody else can attach to the sewer, because we want to save that remaining capacity for a priority. And so economic development planning should be, what is that priority? But then on a larger level, and this is one of the strategies in the plan that we're really beginning to dig into and work into, is getting all of the communities together, and not just the ones I mentioned, but there are some that don't have sewer treatment plants at all, and others that are at using different plants that may be newer at capacity. And really having a conversation about what do we need to do? What is the problem if we want to allow new economic development? And that might be new housing, but that also might be new office buildings are kind of cold right now, but new R&D facilities, let's say, they need sewer too. So we're having that conversation to figure out the best sustainable way to treat that sewage. And then, meanwhile, Lowell is working on a multi-$100 million project that will take years and years to address that combined sewer overflow. And what that means is most of the other communities have a separate sewer and stormwater system. So the water that falls on the roads is usually just going into a ditch and then going into the ground. But in Lowell, it drains into the sewer because that's what they did 100 years ago, and it's really expensive to replace, as we are finding out. So they're taking those systems and switching it so that the stormwater, when it rains, goes into its own separate system and gets dumped out into the Merrimack after some light treatment, because it's just rainwater basically. And that way it won't overload the sewage system and dump raw sewage into the river when that happens, when it's overloaded.
Which has been happening.
For hundreds of years. And, it doesn't permanently, I'm not saying, therefore, don't swim in the Merrimack. Just don't swim in the Merrimack after it storms.
That's good advice. Yeah. Okay, so I think there's a bit of an intersection or a sort of Venn diagram here when you're talking about wastewater systems and you're talking about housing development. I guess maybe we could start. Can I ask you, what housing needs are there when it comes to economic development? And then after that, maybe we can talk about the relationship between some of that wastewater treatment and planning and housing.
Yeah, good question. In the CEDS plan specifically, and we've also done a housing plan, and that looks at a lot more factors of housing. But in this economic development lens, we see housing as infrastructure, and that we received feedback from firms as we were doing interviews and things during the development of this plan, that cost of living was preventing them from expanding, preventing them from being able to recruit new workers, and that skilled workers would go through our education system and then leave for cheaper pastures, and therefore they were losing those skills. And the driver of cost of living was housing, was a high cost of housing. And there were a number of ways people have responded, emotionally responded to that, right? we do see that there is a supply and demand problem because we look at the housing vacancy rate specifically, and a healthy rate of rental is about 7 or 8%. That's enough for people to find an apartment if they're looking for it.
So just to clarify for people who are less familiar with that, so that means like if there are 100 units on the market, 7 of the units would be vacant, and that would be like a healthy balance.
Yes.
For reasonable housing prices for rent. Is that right?
It's not the only ingredient to reasonable housing prices, but yes,
Okay.
that is basically it, because that makes the landlord hungry enough to lower the rent enough to get those occupied. That gives enough that there's a few options on the market for that person who's looking for housing. And for sales units, for when a house is for sale or a condo is for sale, that's usually a smaller number. That's more like 2%. So 2 out of every 100 would be vacant and looking for somebody to buy it. Right now, we're only at 4%, 3 to 4% for the rental units, and we're at functionally 0% for sales units. Every time a home or a condo goes on the market, it's almost immediately sold.
As someone who eventually wants to own a home, I can attest to that being true.
As of a year ago, I'm a new home buyer as well. And
Congrats.
thank you. It was a long process. And I did not get my first or second or third offer. And that makes it a seller's market, and they can raise the prices. So we know we need to have more housing units. And the other question, this is getting a little bit off of economic development, but in terms of homelessness, you think about how folks might need who are living in their cars or doubled up or living in a shelter or living on the street. And you're saying, they just need to get their life together and be able to, then they'd be able to get a house. If there's barely any units on the market, what units are they going to occupy? Are they going to occupy one of those last 4 houses, last 3 units? Are they really going to outbid somebody who, So we need more units of all different types is what we think. But we also realize that a lot of the quality of place is about our green spaces and our open spaces, our really great town centers. Going back to economic development is quality of life.
Yeah.
What we tried to do is work with communities and figure out the best way that additional housing units won't hurt their finances or quality of life, but will actually enhance it. And going back to the economic development, if they're wanting jobs and businesses, they need units that might either, let's say, be available for older folks so they can, when appropriate, when they want to, downsize and have those units available for the new families. That might be the new workforce that the businesses are looking for, or units built to be starter homes, built to be the duplexes or, quads or whatever that somebody could buy as their first condo or their first house as their family is growing. And that is the workforce that the businesses are looking for and may or may not be finding because of that cost of living.
Yeah, I could speak just from personal experience. I teach in Lexington, and we are not able to afford housing in that area. Hence, we are here. Obviously, we love it here also.
Yeah.
But like, if your goal is to live near where you work, it can be really hard to find affordable housing near where you work, using that lowercase affordable, just the things that are within reach for me. And so it makes sense, that you would want to have enough of a workforce within a reasonable distance, that doesn't have to drive an hour to work.
Right.
So that makes sense.
It's a regional thing, It's not a only Lowell thing or only the suburbs thing. It's a statewide thing. We know it's at least an Eastern Massachusetts thing, but when we're focused on a region, we can tell it's a regional thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Not to like point fingers at any particular place, but just to say, this is the kind of statewide market that we are in, and what can we do to try and address that? Right.
Together.
Stronger together. That's right. Greater Lowell, stronger together. Maybe we shift to transportation. I'm curious, and this may not be very specific to the specific traded industries we're trying to bring in, but what changes can we make to Greater Lowell's transportation infrastructure in order to, foster economic development?
Yeah. My agency, NMCOG, does do a lot of transportation planning because we are staff to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and that's where all the federal funding comes through, and then we make decisions on where to target that federal funding. And we don't make it arbitrarily. We have to make plans, and then we do formulas and so forth. So it's all pretty prescriptive, but we do all of that. And what we kind of come to realize is, again, we really need an all-of-the-above approach. We know that we're in New England, and I'm beating around the bush. Congestion's pretty bad here. But we also know we're in New England. We know we're not going to build 10-lane roads like in Florida. We don't want those. We want our charming communities. And we also know that whether or not we develop, the traffic is there because people are driving. And so how can we get even a few of those cars more off the road? And I'd say it's not a goal in itself. Like, we're not trying to tell people not to drive or make it more difficult to drive. We're trying to give people options. Yeah. And those options just don't exist right now. So transit is critical. We are looking at working with neighboring cities. Can commuter rail be extended? I don't know. That's a conversation we're having with the state and whatnot. We are looking at the LRTA, the Lowell Regional Transit Authority, and the bus system for Greater Lowell, and how they can continue their great service and expand it and support more. And we're looking at making sure that things are walkable, that sidewalks exist, that bike trails exist, etc., just so people have more options with transportation. Younger folks are looking for more options in transportation. I know it's kind of like the common knowledge, but they are what we're seeing in surveys and things. And while still making sure that when people are driving, they're safe. Yeah. That's really the critical thing is safety when we're thinking about cars and vehicles. We also see transportation. I mentioned it at the beginning of this interview and haven't mentioned it yet, even though it's been on my mind the entire time, is the equity issue. And how do we make sure that transportation is not a barrier to opportunity? If you're living in Central Lowell and you might want to get a job at one of the tech firms, whether it's an engineer or a food service person or anything in between, in terms of wages, not in terms of importance. I tend to think that food service folks are pretty important. I used to be one, and it was not an easy job. But all of that to say, is transportation a barrier to that opportunity? Especially because housing costs are limiting where you can live. That's two things to work on. One is the housing cost issue, and the other is the transportation issue. Yeah,
I appreciated, I believe it was Blake Acton put together the jobs accessibility report. That was really cool to see some recommendations for to make jobs more accessible by the LRTA. It was really incredible, honestly, to see that they were able to, map how far it takes people to get to their workplace and or how long that takes, rather. So that's a really cool report I would recommend people look at. Let's see. In terms of driving safety, like, what has NMCOG been doing in that regard, like making driving more safe?
Yeah. First of all, Blake's a colleague and a lot of work and analysis onto that report. So ditto on if people want to take a look at it. It's really cool data. And he and his team, which is like only a team of like 3 people, have been working also on something called the Vision Zero report. And so that zero is zero traffic fatalities. That's the vision. And I won't get into too much detail because my title is not Director of Transportation. But one thing that we recognize is that speed kills, right? So how can we slow down traffic? And that doesn't necessarily even mean actually slowing down somebody's commute, right? Because if you remove a bottleneck but slow them down throughout the entire thing, they're going safer, but the distance travel is the same. So really what we're thinking about is how to make sure that we've identified high-risk corridors. It's kind of two different lenses of analysis. One is looking at history and seeing how many accidents have happened in the past. And another is looking at dangerous conditions. And those are often wide lanes where people are encouraged to speed. That's where there's a lot of weird intersections where people are making turning movements that might be unexpected. And so really targeting those when we see the risk factors and the actual crashes coincide, we know that is a project that needs to be done as soon as possible. So that's what we're looking at. And when I say a project, it could be things from reconfiguring an intersection to make it more sensible, or even a roundabout. And we can talk about roundabouts, but whatever. Whatever the safest thing that we have researched is, and slowing the speed down by doing anything from narrowing lanes, adding street trees. There's a lot of weird things you wouldn't think would slow down traffic that research indicates slows down traffic. Enforcement is also important, but...
Well, that's nice that street trees can help with that, because street trees are just nice to have too. So
and they get more pedestrians because people want shade.
Yeah, it's a win-win-win.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think I have two more questions. So we talked a lot about hard infrastructure.
Yeah.
I want to get to some of the soft infrastructure. So some of your report looked at workforce development. I'm wondering, could you describe what we need to do in terms of workforce development to attract those traded industries for Greater Lowell?
Yeah. Well, I want to start out with a shout out to my friends at the Mass Hire Greater Lowell Workforce Board. I might be getting those words in the wrong order, but they're all the correct words. And the Career Center. They're different agencies, but they're basically the same agency. And the reason why they're different is because of all sorts of arcane federal rules. Okay. But they do an amazing job. When I've looked at other performance indicators of workforce boards, they get more people in their classes, etc. But that's because they have to do a lot of hard outreach, a lot of outreach into communities, whether that be youth or adults that might not think of themselves as somebody who might do some sort of career, whether that be anything from something that is a college track to something that requires, trade, apprenticeship, become a plumber or carpenter or things like that. So this network of agencies, which includes the Workforce Board, but also includes universities and college, Middlesex Community College. It includes small organizations like Project Learn that does work connecting with young people and kind of, again, opening their eyes to career opportunities and connecting the high school with Lowell High School in particular with companies and things, right? That is a lot of different institutions and agencies that are all critical cogs in this. And we see, going back to that resilience, making sure that we have enough support so none of those cogs go away. Because the reason why we have success is, I think, because of those partnerships compared to other workforce boards in Massachusetts. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like just collaboration among all of those different stakeholders that fit in different kind of niche parts of this, the kind of workforce development. So whether that's youth or younger adults, or if that's community college, or if that's universities, maybe I'll ask, how does, as you understand it, does Link fit into this? Is this an area of expertise for you, or I'm curious your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting question. Link is interesting because it's focused on almost that next step after university. Where are our students going after they graduate? Can some of those firms be located in Lowell specifically, but in Greater Lowell more generally, so that we don't lose that talent? So that's why the proposed Lowell Innovation Network Corridor, which is what LINK stands for, is proposing housing that might be attractive to young professionals, along with space for companies like Draper, which is a defense-oriented firm. Speaking of other defense, that is in our area, but also a lot of biotechnology, a lot of other different types of companies. I will say UMass Lowell, definitely that's their baby. So I'm not qualified to talk about it much more than what I just did. There's all sorts of pros and cons to everything. So what NMCOG sees its role as, to bring it to what we do as a regional agency, is to make sure that those opportunities that they're brought, that they are leveraged fully across the region, that we think about that housing and that affordable housing angle as things get developed, and also the natural systems, open space, all of that comes into play when we're talking about a big project like Link.
Last question about this sort of soft infrastructure. There's a mention in the report. It says the region, like many, also suffers from a shortage of childcare that hinders the workforce participation of parents. I'm curious, how could access to childcare improve economic development in Lowell?
I love ending on this kind of small topic that's still really super cogent for the region. I'm not saying anything revolutionary in saying childcare is too expensive in Massachusetts and in Greater Lowell. What we found is that is a hindrance from, say, women especially, but fathers too, entering the workforce and working full time. It is an example of how cost of living impacts our ability to fully realize our dreams, honestly. It also is probably an extreme equity issue, right? Because those with the least resources won't have access to childcare and then get shut off from resources. How to solve the problem? It's not like we have a beautiful strategy in this plan for that, other than to continue working on it. We definitely, at the very least, are looking and making sure that communities don't make it difficult to open childcare centers, so that we gotta make sure that they're safe, but they should be allowed in small home care situations, should be allowed in neighborhoods, etc. So those are some of the small steps we can take, but obviously there's big steps as well that we should work with the state on. It's just one example of many about how these little things that some people might not even ever think of make big impacts on the economy.
Great. And last thing I'll just pose, if you felt there was anything that we didn't hit on that you wish we could talk about from the reports, I'll leave it up to you.
I think we didn't talk much about the actual strategies in the report, and so maybe I'll just mention.
Yeah.
It's funny to talk about analysis and kind of some of the high level ideas and the infrastructure, and then so what does this plan actually say that we're planning to do? And so we got kind of 4 big ideas that we want to work with communities or other agencies on. One of them is boring but important, which is that soft infrastructure, it's capacity building, making sure that talked about the mess of organizations that do everything from workforce development to what my organization does, planning, and each of the municipalities plays a role. And other states don't always have this problem because they have more unified county governments, they have more people under, so this is a alphabet soup. And so it's about building partnerships and not just formalizing them. So we already work really well together, but somebody looking in on the outside might not even know where to start. So formalizing these partnerships and creating more easy to understand entry points. The second part is, I kept talking about quality of life. We do have a strategy that's really about, we call it destination development, but it's about the town centers and the neighborhood centers, Cambodia Town, all of the important places, making sure we're enhancing them. So we're talking about infrastructure and roads and electricity, and that's part of the strategy. But we want to make sure that we're also talking about our open spaces and our farm stands and things like that. Those aren't necessarily traded economies, but they are integral to our identity. And how do we support those? And so we're developing a destination development strategy, which basically figures out what the strongest assets we have in this region are, really leaning into them and enhancing them through investments. The third strategy is actually about link and opportunities and things like that, and bringing those opportunities to make sure that they help the entire region. They also help all kinds of people in the region. So we don't want to leave people behind. When something like Link happens, we want to make sure that all different types of people benefit. So it's about bringing together, it's going to sound also super boring, but committees, but basically the entities that are thinking about all of those different types of people, elders and youth and everything, and those opportunities, and making sure we're talking about how to share those opportunities. And then the fourth strategy is absolutely infrastructure. So we're going to be creating a kind of a plan, looking ahead at projections and a lot of technical stuff. But what it boils down to is figuring out where we can economically develop and redevelop as a region, where we want to place these additional traded industry firms and advanced manufacturing, small scale facilities, where we want to put these new different types of housing. Do we want to redevelop certain areas that were old offices, let's say, and offices are not seeming like they're coming back because people are working from home. There's AI, more people. So what do we do with that space? We probably redevelop it. What kind of infrastructure needs will those have? Let's plan ahead to make sure to make those investments. So those are the four big things that we are going to try and do with the region. And I wanted to mention that partly because I want to make sure that it's clear that this is a strategy and we want people to see and engage and think about it, but also because we want to bring it back to how are we helping people. That first question you had, well, I guess the first question was what was NMCOG, but the second question, what is economic development?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you bring that up, the quality of life and wanting to, and I probably should have said from the beginning, that's ultimately why I come to this, right? Is like wanting to seeing economic development as a way to improve people's quality of life. And as you talked about, there's so many groups doing really cool things around building that quality of place in Greater Lowell, and like Mosaic Lowell is doing some really awesome stuff. I got to write about a couple of the bus stops that they, the art projects and all of the other things. And, the Department of Planning and Development in Lowell is doing some awesome, like the parks, all the ARPA funded parks that have gone into all the different parts of the city in Lowell. It's really cool.
If you get a few dollars to do something, look at what you can do. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's a real example of how if we can invest in our public realm and our public, that we get better outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you invest in the public goods, you're going to have more public goods. I saw the announcement about the Sponge Park, which I'm really excited about, living not too far away from there, having parks in walking distance. It's just, I'm excited about the future of Lowell, and I'm hoping that these strategies will help to make life better for Lowell. So I wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing, for the work that NMCOG does to kind of be, careful and thoughtful in the way we build the future of the region. And just wanted to, thank you for the amount of collaboration and time that goes into something like this, navigating a lot of different perspectives and personalities and finding consensus. It's like a beautiful thing about democracy and about, about planning and all that. So, Chris Hayes, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was fun chatting, and hate to use a cliche, but it takes a village. So I'm glad to be part of the village. Thank you.
Thanks.